Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now about the importance of this draft for the Washington Commanders. I think we all know why it's a big draft, but I go into a lot of reasons why and how they can really set themselves up for the future after what I think has been a good offseason. Listen, they got the new owner, got a new coach, new GM. You get the quarterback right, get the left tackle right, maybe get another edge rusher and a cornerback. Now you're really taking a step as a franchise. So that's up on ESPN.com. Also, in a few minutes, I'll be joined by former Washington Redskin tackle Jon Jansen. Jon was one of my favorites to cover back in the day when he was here, solid right tackle for Washington. He and Chris Samuels, a terrific bookend. But I wanted to bring Jon on for a couple of reasons. One, JJ McCarthy. Now, the last few minutes of our 5, 6, 7 minutes of our conversation were more about JJ McCarthy because Jon is a Michigan football analyst. So he does morning radio in Detroit. He knows JJ very well. You cannot dismiss McCarthy as a potential pick for Washington. I think right now I would still say Jaden Daniels is a favorite, but I am not under the assumption that it's between Jaden and Drake May. I think like I said, I don't think you can I don't think you can dismiss McCarthy, which is why I wanted to bring him on. So Jon knows him very well. And so there you go. We're going to talk to him in a minute. But before I get there, there's a couple things. One, couple programming notes. I'm going to have on Jeff Legwold from ESPN to talk about his top 100 list. Jeff talks to dozens of scouts, executives, coaches, and when in compiling his top 100 player list for the draft. So it may be a different list than what others might have. But I would say this: nobody's lists are ever the same, and if they are, it's a matter of groupthink, and you didn't probably do the work, and you're following groupthink. Not always, but I do think that's a lot of the case. You go to a team, there's sometimes teams are very different on their list. So Leggy's list is compiled through his own work, but also talking to dozens of scouts, executives, coaches, whatever. Anyways, I wanted to bring him on and talk about some guys of interest for Washington, why he ranked them how he did, but just insight into some of these players because few know him as much as Leggy does. Listen, folks, there are a lot of people who might watch a game or two and think a TV copy of a guy and think, oh, I know this guy. That's not what Leggy does. He's watching these guys since September and putting in a ton of work, watching film, but also talking to scouts. So very important. Anyway, that'll probably be out Monday. I think it is. Also, for you gold members, I'm going to be doing a private Zoom Monday night, 7:30 Eastern time. Join me there. Bring your questions just for you guys. If you want to become a gold member, go to the Ampire Media YouTube page on your laptop, see the word join, click on there, find the membership and go. And for the other members, the Q&A will be, or the little session will be available to you afterwards. So thank you for everybody who's a member and join me there. And we'll have some fun talking about the draft. And I'll have more stuff for everybody else before the draft. And then on draft night, I will have a podcast up shortly after they make their selection number 2, whoever it is. And I will be glad to get it over because I think this whole process can be nauseating and exhausting. I think it's comical that sometimes a reporter might say something positive about a guy that they think could be good for this franchise, and it makes people upset. That to me is kind of funny. I think that each of these 3 quarterbacks that have been discussed, each offers something to me that would be intriguing and tempting for a team to draft. So because you like one over the other, does that mean you don't like the others? No. So I think we can be a little bit more mature than thinking like that. Anyways, so let's move on from that. But the other thing I want to talk about is the whole Jaden Daniels situation and just the smoke or the noise that is out there. And I would just say ignore the noise because I think that there's too much out there that I don't think is indicative of his thinking. I have not heard during this process that he doesn't want to play here. And I think I told you last week that there was someone who's close to him who felt like Washington would be a good place for him certainly from a football perspective. And anyway, so there you go. But I have not heard that he doesn't want to play here. So I'm going to stick with what I know based on what I've heard and where I've heard it from. So I just think that there's a lot of stuff. And here's the other thing. There's zero chance that Washington is going to change its mind on a player based on an agent's emoji tweet. Zero chance. So if they want him, they are going to take him, because one thing to know, it's not like the agent is there all the time. You're dealing with the player, and this player, when I talk to other teams about him and I ask them, do you have any concerns? Do you have any red flags? And I asked one the other day, team that really likes him, no red flags. So just understand that. And when you hear this, and the other thing is, Jaden Daniels hasn't said a word, so we don't know for sure what he really thinks. Ignore the noise, folks. Here's my conversation with former Washington Redskin offensive tackle Jon Jansen. All right, John, despite that nasty background that you have there, and enjoy your one season because it's the last for a while. Anyways, good to see you again.
One season. Hey, it's great to see you. I'm not sure what you're talking about. One season. We've kicked the Buckeyes' ass for now 3 years in a row. The national championship was nice, and I know I have this jersey here simply for you, but for all of those nostalgic Washington Commanders fans, this one is an old school. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Redskins.
You're allowed to say it. Yeah. Anyways, it's been good catching up with you. I'll talk to you later.
Enjoyed it. Trust me, this is longer than I expected.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll get past the nauseating background and I'll be okay, because I'm just going to look straight ahead and try not to look in your direction. Anyways, it is good to see you. And first of all, tell people what you're doing now, because it's always fun to get updates, and you're doing a lot of radio analyst work. But
yeah, so in Detroit, I'm on an Odyssey station, 97.1 The Ticket, from 6 to 10 in the morning. I've got a new co-host, Jim Costa, and another host, Heather Park. We do obviously the morning drive from 6 to 10 in the morning, and then the rest of the day, I'm in one of your favorite places, Ann Arbor, which I do a podcast in the trenches, Conquering Heroes, a number of them. They're MGO Blue podcasts with Jon Jansen, and I'm do the Michigan games on Saturdays, and I do a lot of different things in terms of media regarding Michigan athletics. So it keeps me busy, but probably my number one job is right now is trying to be dad. Because I've got one that is graduating high school, and she's going off to, you'll appreciate this, she's not going to either of our schools. She's going to Purdue. And so she's not going to be an engineer. She's or an astronaut. She is going into nursing.
Wow,
and then I've got 4 more along the way. So just trying to be dad and get to baseball, softball, basketball, whatever other events are going on.
That's a lot. And you have one is she deciding still between crew and basketball?
Yeah. So I've got college. A junior in high school as well, who is being recruited to row at college, and Michigan's on the table. So we'll see what goes there. I don't know. She's got big dreams, so I don't know where she's going to go, but yeah, she's being recruited for basketball as well. So it's a busy time in the Jansen house.
I would say I would not probably go to Michigan for rowing, because what I hear is after this offseason, it's a sinking ship. So anyway.
So we need rowers.
Well, there you go. So anyways, so I want to get into, JJ in a few minutes, because that's why I want to have you on. And clearly, even as on this side of the aisle, the kid's got some talent and some things that are very intriguing to NFL teams. But I do want to talk, since you played offensive line, and, this team has struggled with the line the last few years. First of all, what's the key to having a good offensive line? You were a part of a few.
Yeah, it's really about how can those 5 guys perform as one, and they've got to be on the same page. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. And when I was there, it was Corey Raymer, Casey Robach at center, and we had a couple other guys, but that's really where that communication, being able to connect the left and the right side together to make sure everybody sees in the run game, hey, are you going to the right linebacker? Are you making that right declaration? You got the right combination blocks. Because assignment, if you don't know where you're going or what you're doing, then you could play with the greatest technique in the world, but if you're doing the wrong thing, it doesn't really matter. And so then in pass protection, obviously, especially if you're going to have a young quarterback, you've got to know exactly your 5 guys. And when they bring 5 or they bring 6, okay, who is it that we are blocking? And the quarterback has to know that, the running backs, the receivers, everybody has to know that, because if they bring one more guy, then the quarterback is throwing hot off of that receiver, or the running back has to pick him up, or a tight end, or whoever. And you've got to be able to operate as one. And during a game, you can't always make those calls. So that some of the communication has to be nonverbal. And you say, well, how is that possible when your hand is in the dirt or on the turf, and you can't see everything that's going on the other side? Well, as a right tackle, which I was in Washington, I know through film study what I see on my side of the line. I can, with almost a 99% certainty, know what's going on the other side. And it's about repetition. It's about doing it so many times that I know what Chris Samuels was going to be doing, or Andy Heck was going to be doing, without even being able to communicate what I'm doing on my side. It's the view. And that's where, when you have injuries, you've got to have those guys that are coming in at a guard position or a center position on the exact same page. And it's meetings. It's just a matter of putting the time in together so that you know what's going on before it even happens.
So you were part of a good line, and up in Detroit, you're watching a really good offensive line up there too. So if you're constructing a line, how do you build a good line? Because I've seen teams that take guys high and they still don't do well. I've seen other teams that take a different approach. I mean, so how would you construct a good offensive line?
The three most important positions are your center and your two tackles. Mm-hmm. And then you can fit in different guards that, and obviously you want to have a great player at every position, but with the salary cap and with injuries, that's not always possible. So I want to know that going into a season, I've got a center that is on the same page as my quarterback, the same page as the coordinator, and obviously the same page as the tackles. He's got to be a guy that is number one, smart, plays with good pad level, and there's nothing more important than the center quarterback exchange. He's got to be reliable, whether it's under center or in the shotgun. And then he's got to be a good communicator. He's got to be able to think under pressure, make last-second declarations and calls, and be able to, shift on the fly. And then you've got to have two tackles that have some length, have the aggressive nature. You got to be, because I think football, you can't be a passive individual and play the game of football. You've got to have a violent streak. You got to have the want to be able to be in the mix like that. So if you can protect the edges and the width of your pocket, which is what the tackle's responsibility is to do, and then you've got a center that's putting everybody on the right page, who is going to help both of those guards protect the depth of the pocket. Now all of a sudden that you've got a functional offensive line. Now it goes to, do you have the right personnel to have a dominant right tackle like we do in Detroit with Penei Sewell? Right. And even though his upbringing wasn't great, Taylor Decker is a serviceable left tackle. And we've been able to salvage and coach him up since he didn't get any of that in college.
All right, there we go. Go Bucks. Anyways, so now you just threw me for a loop there. Anyway, but when you look at it too, because you were able to step right in and play as a second round pick. Why do you think I'm going to ask, I know what your first line is going to be, why you're able to step right in and play, but what qualities allow someone to do that?
Well, so I'll avoid the Michigan reference, but I will say this. All right, Big Ten offensive linemen. They are as prepared as anyone coming into the league to be able to step in and play. And you could say that about some of the SEC schools and some Big 12 schools. I mean, everything's gotten weird with conference expansion, but and the style of play in college, it used to be that you would come into the NFL and everybody could run block, but when they would coach you up on pass blocking. Well, now you have guys coming into the league that have never been in a three-point stance or rarely been in a three-point stance. They're great at pass protecting, which is what you have to be able to be good at now in the NFL. But then they're teaching them the run block, and it seems so foreign to me, but that's the style of play now. But I was able to come into play because, and so I'm going to go down that road as well.
Sure, of course. It was
at Michigan when I played Iowa. I was playing against Jared DeVries, who was also a second-round pick, and I was playing against Anthony Herron. I was playing against, Finkus and Vrabel and those guys that were, wearing those ugly colors down in Columbus. You playing against NFL talent. So then translate that. You may not come in as a rookie and ultimately be the player that you are going to be or need to be, but you're coming in having the experience again of playing against NFL talent.
So if you're looking at the draft, because like Washington needs at least one tackle, and you can make an argument they need two. Hard to get two in one draft. But if you're looking at that, like, are there guys that I don't know how much you've looked at this draft, if there are any tackles that you really like in this draft? Do you pay attention to the tackles in this draft? Have you done a lot of work on that?
I do. And obviously, I mean, the number one tackle in this draft is Joe Alt out of
Right.
Notre Dame. He's a guy that comes in and he has the pedigree to do it. He understands what it's going to take to be able to be successful in the NFL. And I did see a guy out at for Washington, and I butcher his name every time, but it's Fautanu. And he's a guy that I think plays with really good technique. And some questions about his size, but I like his mentality. He plays with the mean streak, and I think he could be a guy that is very productive in the NFL. J.C. Latham out of Alabama is another guy that I think could be very productive. The problem that you run into is, all right, these are all guys that, and I know Washington's picking, second right now, that if you're not going to take a franchise quarterback at 2, a tackle would be the next logical destination or logical pick in terms of positional value.
Right.
But if you need 2 of them, now you're going to be drafting either second or third round. And this is a very deep group of tackles and offensive linemen in this draft. So you can get some quality players, but the further you go down the list, the more flaws everybody's going to have. And it just may take some more time to develop.
Right. And that's why I say point you, because you were a second round pick who started from day one. And I think that's what they're going to need here. And so that's why it's hard. How much can you play for some goofy coaches here, man? But how much does coaching impact a line's success? And by, scheme or whatever.
So scheme is a large part. There's guys that have different skill sets that fit better in certain offenses. And I was a guy coming into Norv Turner's offense. It was a play action offense. It was a run heavy offense for Michigan that I played for. It was a play action offense. So it was an easy fit for me. And so for my first 2 years, I ran almost an exact replica of offense that I ran in college. And if you can find some of those guys that run a similar offense to what you're going to run this year, it makes that transition a little bit easier because the skills, the techniques, all of those things are there. Obviously, terminology is very different, but it's more important that you have the right person as your offensive line coach. When I came in, it was Russ Grimm. And, everybody in Washington loves Russ Grimm. I love Russ Grimm, and he set me up for success for the entirety of my career with, one, his demeanor, his ability to reach each individual player, because everybody in the NFL is coming from a different school of thought, and not just different schools, but, hey, maybe I was taught, a certain kick step and somebody else was taught, something similar, but in a different way. And he really let us be who we were. And his whole concept was, if you're not getting the job done, I'll coach you up and we'll work on your technique. But if you're getting the job done, I'm not going to ruin something that's working. I can help you with little, tweaks to your technique, which is what he was so good at. But it really starts with that offensive line. And when you start talking about scheme, to me, play action pass, or a play action offense, run heavy play action offense is one that it's very easy to transition from college to the NFL, because you're not going to be setting on 7-step drops all the time. You're not going to be, and right now there's some great edge rushers in the NFL. And there's some great edge rushers, Micah Parsons in the division. So you've got to find a way to, one, pair that with giving your players as much advantage as possible to keep them out of some of those risky situations.
I just remember when Spurrier was here, how he killed you guys.
Oh, it was. I mean, you want to talk about 5-man. It was almost straight 5-man protection. And if they brought 6 or even 7, quarterback just had to get the ball out as quickly as possible. And you just asked Patrick Ramsey, I don't think he ever had a clean back of his jersey.
I don't think he recovered from some of those games. I like it just for his career. I think that just damaged him.
No, no. And I mean, you could hear the whole, the ear set. You could hear Spurrier on the sidelines. Throw the ball. Okay. They're coming from everywhere.
I also remember with Spurrier, because you guys won a game in Seattle where like Kenny Watson and I can't remember who the other running back was, both ran over 100 yards and you win like 14-10 or 14-7. And he was upset after the game. And the next week you guys are playing Jacksonville, who couldn't stop the run, but it was a homecoming for him. And you guys threw the ball like 50 times when it was close.
Yeah, I've got so many Spurrier stories. You know who that running back probably was? Who was the kid from Iowa? I think it was number 22.
Liddell.
It might have been Liddell Betts.
Yeah.
Great kid, great running back. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that was probably after Stephen Davis. He didn't fit Spurrier's offense. This is a guy that was a record-setting running back for Washington in terms of touchdowns and productivity, but he didn't fit Spurrier's offense. So yeah, let's just get rid of him.
You got a favorite Gibbs story?
Shoot. You put me on the spot here.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, if there was ever a coach that lived and breathed football, it was Joe Gibbs. I mean, that whole staff would sleep there overnight. Don Bro, offensive coordinator. I mean, there were certain individuals, and I won't name names, that literally had a baggie next to the couch because that's what they would end up, peeing into in the middle of the night because they didn't want to get up. Sleep was so hard to come by because they were film warriors. Right. And when they finally had a chance to lay down on the couch, they didn't want to get up and disturb the slumber.
I have not heard of the pee bag before.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, and Coy was hilarious because Coy, he knew what was going on. He would go in there and he'd poke a hole in the bottom of the bag. And so yeah, they would do this, and then all of a sudden they wake up in the morning and the bag is empty. What the heck? Coy was hilarious. Danny
Smith would tell some great Don Bro stories. And just like with pizza on the top of the car that gets blown off of onto the
making a calzone out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, hit the other one was, someone told me like one time, because he had Bro used to have the red replay flag in his pocket. And there was one time they wanted to throw the flag, but he had pants on that had like really deep pockets, and he kept throwing items onto the field in his pockets before his keys are on the field. Yeah. There's like money on the field.
I'll give you a Danny Smith story. Special team coaches are a breed, all of them to themselves. Yeah. They have to be, because they're dealing with a different breed in terms of kickers. So he is extremely OCD. So you'd walk in, and this is when they had actual, whether it was VHS tapes or whatever types of tapes they would put in, he would have them stacked in his office, and they would be all, I don't know if they were alphabetized or, by date, by number. Well, he had a certain system. So Ethan Albright and I would, every once in a while, we'd go in there and we would either make it look like we moved one, or we would actually move one, but we had to make it look like, there was evidence that one had been moved. So he would spend the next week taking out every single one, trying to find that one that we moved, and then putting them all back in to where he had it all labeled and organized.
That's fantastic. Well, you guys also, you guys would torment Brett Conway too.
Well, I mean, yeah, he's a kicker. Those are easy. Kickers are easy to torment.
But he got you. Was it you and Corey back? Didn't he get you guys back?
Yeah. So the story is, and the facts of the matter are, we were playing in San Francisco, and we won the division out there, my rookie season. And Larry Centers caught a nice pass to seal the victory. And I mean, I got stories that could just, one would lead to another, but I'll try and stay focused on Brett Conway. And so Brett, which I don't know how kickers ever get hurt. They don't do anything, but he apparently had a tweaked back or something, and it had taken something for his back. And we were celebrating on the way back when you used to be able to have, beer and other forms of alcohol on the plane. It's a 5-hour, 6-hour ride back from San Francisco to DC. And he washed it down with a couple of pops and was, sleeping in a heavy slumber. And so all of us, as we, created our empties, we stacked them up on him, and we drew on a Sharpie on his face. We had gotten some lipstick from one of the stewardesses, and we're drawing on him. And I won't tell you what it was that there were some arrows pointed to certain, openings on his face, and different things that were suggested that you could put there. And so he wakes up when we finally land, and all of a sudden, he moves, and all of the beer and all of the bottles, all that stuff fall off of him. He doesn't even know what's going on. He goes home, and his significant other at the time meets him at the door and just is like, what the heck is going on? Because his face was still all marked up. So about a week or two later, he creates this sign, puts it on the back of my truck. And I just hop in my truck, taking Corey home. He hops in the other side, or we were going hunting or something. And on the back of my truck, it's this big sign that says, "I like big hairy men." And there's a big hairy man sitting in the side in the passenger seat.
That's fantastic. Last one before I get to JJ. I know Zorn was not the easiest one for you, but I don't even know how to describe him.
There was a lot of difficulties in my time in Washington, and I mean, 6 different head coaches in 10 years, and Gibbs was there for 4 of them. So I think everybody remembers those years and the churning of the coaches. Marty Schottenheimer,
Right.
Loved Marty, and I wish that we would have had an opportunity. Remember how we ended that year?
8 out of 11.
Started 0-5, and then we ended up 8-8, and we were really poised, I felt, to make a nice run the following years. And he had done a lot to try and manage the cap, manage the draft picks, and put us back in a good position. But I think Zorn was just out of his element. He was originally hired for, Washington historians as the offensive coordinator before we had a head coach.
Right.
And then, Mr. Snyder was, like, hey, let's go hire the head coach. Well, who wants to come in as a head coach, and you're inheriting an offensive coordinator? It just didn't, it was all out of sorts. And so he was then promoted to head coach, and I just think he was out of his element.
He was. And then, also, I think for a couple decades, I think people feel good now because Dan Snyder's no longer in charge. Could you tell, like, just how bad, do you know what kind of an owner he is? You were here a long time.
Well, so it's difficult for me. Yes, it was a challenging time. It wasn't a productive time in Washington. But in regards to my personal interactions with Mr. Snyder, when I tore my Achilles, he did everything that he possibly could to give me the best medical care. And a lot of this was dictated by the union and that, but a ride on his right. Private jet to get me back from the Hall of Fame game to DC, to be able to go down and have the best available medical care throughout the entire process. And then the same thing when I dislocated my ankle and broke my leg. He always treated me with the utmost respect, and my family as well. So I take that into consideration with, again, he's just probably out of his element, just like Zorn was a good coordinator, a good play caller, but not a great head coach. I think that there were certain aspects that Dan did really well, but there were also other things. I mean, he had no patience. And when you churn 6 coaches over in 10 years, and that didn't stop after I left, and you wear out the fan base to where when I got there was some ridiculous wait list on season tickets, like 20 or 30,000 people deep. And it was the spot on the wait list was one that was handed down when people literally died. Their kids were put in position to inherit that spot on the wait list. And then to think, 2 years ago, there were more Eagles fans, Giants fans, Dallas fans in the stadium than there were, Washington fans. That was really hard to see.
It was. And, it's funny because, like, I know a couple years ago, like, they were 10, like, hey, we quadrupled our season ticket base. I'm like, well, what was it at? And they don't want to say because it was so low. So, but anyways, let's get to now. So I want to talk to you about JJ too, because JJ is, I don't know how firmly he'd be in play for the second pick. I don't know that, but he's a guy of interest because he's, as we record this, he's visiting in Washington. So he's clearly on a list of interest. What do you think about him as a quarterback? Because he seems to be a guy, there's not a lot that he was able to show but he showed things. So what do you think about him?
So my evaluation of JJ is I think he has a tremendous upside. And I could say this about a lot of the quarterbacks coming out, and I would say this about every single quarterback. No rookie quarterback should start in the NFL. And I know that your guy went to Houston and had a tremendous rookie season. That is not the norm. That is a tremendous quarterback in a system that was built to make sure that he could find success. But rookie quarterbacks really struggle in the NFL because the game is so different than it is at the college level. And why I think he has huge upside is he's a guy that's going to be a student of the game. He wants to master his craft, whether it's his throwing ability, his technique under center, and he has taken snaps under center, which a lot of these quarterbacks coming out have not done. He's really cool and calm under pressure. He does a good job of escaping the pocket. He's got good athletic ability, but it's that drive to win. It's that drive that my stats aren't what's important to me. The only stat that's important is the win, and he proved that at Michigan. You know, he could have gone to a lot of different places. He could have transferred from Michigan to anywhere else and been a more prolific passer, but he wanted to win at Michigan, and he wanted to win the way that Jim Harbaugh was going to call the offense, and that was heavy run. So there's a lot of mystery about what JJ could be as a passer. But I will say this, when you look at his numbers and what he did in college, the 21 season, he was a guy that would come in for Cade McNamara, and he was the mobile quarterback, where Cade was the guy that was in there to be the passer. And then when he finally got the head job, the number QB1 in 22, he came in and was a game manager. They didn't ask him to do a lot in the pass game. It was, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards out of the backfield behind a good offensive line. And, his completion percentage was right around 64-65. And then in his junior year, last year, they asked him to do a little bit more. Still not what we've seen from some of these other quarterbacks, but his accuracy improved and his ability to operate the offense. One of the best things I think he does in, not to bring up bad memories, but here's an example: the Ohio State.
I've already had enough therapy. I'm okay.
Okay. All right. So in the Ohio State game, there were a couple of fourth down situations where, a quarterback's job, number one, is to make sure that you're in the right play, the best play possible. And all season long, we've got the Ohio State periods, and they're working on different things throughout the course of the year. And then obviously in that week of game preparation, they had a certain play that was called with formation and movement, and they knew the tendency for Ohio State was when they put Roman Wilson in motion, that they weren't going to be in man coverage in this certain formation of personnel group, that they were going to keep and just roll the safeties over. Well, in this situation, which had never happened before, they were in man coverage, and they moved the safety, or they moved the corner over that was covering Roman Wilson. So he quickly audibled to the right call, handed the ball off to Blake Corum, and they go for a first down. Now, a little bit later in the game, same situation occurs, and he's not sure what's going to happen. They put Roman Wilson in motion, and all of a sudden they just roll the safeties over, so he's able to run the play that was called. My point is, he is going to study the offense and know as much as he possibly can about it. He's also going to study the opponents in the defense and know what is the best play to be in. He can make those adjustments on the fly and make sure, and that's so important in the NFL because defenses are going to be so much more sophisticated at the next level.
Sure. And, and I guess for his transferring, he would have had to have wanted Connor to transfer as well. So, listen, I got to get a dig in somewhere, man. You know that.
I know.
But I will say, like, going back to him, though, some of the things that stood out to me it's funny because people hear like, oh, he's just like Alex Smith. And that's not a negative thing. Like Alex Smith, when he was good, was what they're talking about was really good. But some of the other things is the competitiveness. And again, whether or not he's a second pick worthy of that, that's a different debate. But just as like I'm watching the Blake Corum run down the sidelines, and who is right there with him 30 yards down the field throwing blocks. Like, you don't see quarterbacks. Now, I would say this, like Jaden Daniels, I see competitiveness in him, and Drake May, whatever. But for JJ, that's one of the things that he also showed.
Well, yeah, and that's the traits of a winner. Everybody wants to know, what is the it factor, and what made the Tom Brady great, and what made Peyton Manning great. It was, and because they're similar quarterbacks, but they're different from the quarterbacks now. So that formula is always going to be a little bit different. It's always a moving target. But when you see things like a guy that's running down the field to throw a block for Blake Corum, and you look at the stats and you say, well, the stats don't jump off the page, or you take a game like the Penn State game this year where after, 6 minutes into the second quarter, Michigan never throws another pass.
Right.
Well, he knew that was the best formula because we couldn't block Chop Robinson
Right.
or Aditi Isaac. He knew that was going to be the best game plan, the best path to victory. And that's what you need. If you're going to win a national championship, you're going to win a Big Ten championship, you're going to win a Super Bowl, you've got to have a selfless quarterback that knows my numbers might not be what I want them to be, or how do they stack up against Caleb Williams or Drake May, but his win total is the only thing that matters. And ultimately in the NFL, that's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that keeps jobs, and it's the only thing that keeps quarterbacks employed.
How, as a passer, how did you see him develop? Because that's obviously going to be a huge part of this. So, even in the Ohio State game, he had the one tight window throw that should have been ruled an interception, but was wrongly not overturned.
Right.
It was a good throw. It's a very tight window throw. But that was like, so how did you see him develop as a passer?
So this past year, the years before, when I would see him throw, he's not the gunslinger where, he thinks he can fit the ball into every single, little window or crevice. And there were times where I thought he could have thrown the ball and didn't. And then I saw his confidence this past year where he's making tight throws, where Kurt Campbell, the quarterback coach, is telling him, hey, when this happens, and if you're going to try and hit Roman Wilson on the seam, you've got to throw it right outside the ear hole of that linebacker that's dropping into coverage. As soon as that linebacker turns his head, you throw it past his ear hole, and then it's up to the receiver to make that catch. Same thing with the tight ends, Colston Loveland. There was a couple of those passes where he's got to throw it just over the outstretched arm of a jumping linebacker, but then drop it into your tight end. Hitting wide receivers in stride on the run. Roman Wilson had a number of touchdowns this year where if he's got to break stride at all, he makes the catch, but he's tackled as soon as the catch is made. JJ was able to hit him in stride while he's going, so he doesn't slow down. All he does is reach up, the ball is right there, and he keeps on running, and he runs for a touchdown. Like, that timing, that accuracy, and then the knowledge of what's going on in the secondary is where I think he really made huge jumps this year. And he had 4 interceptions. 3 of those came against Bowling Green, another Ohio team. But that's where I just don't think he was completely focused on what he was doing, but it did hyper-focus him the rest of the year, because against Bowling Green, you can make some of those mistakes and still get away with a win. If you make those mistakes against Ohio State or against Penn State or against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, you're not going to win the game.
And I saw a quarterback make those mistakes in that game, and they lost. So I'm well aware. Exactly. But that's exactly what that game is. So last thing with him then, just how do you see him developing as an NFL quarterback? Like, and I don't know if you want to compare him to Jaden or Drake, but you don't have to. But I'm curious, like, what you think his ceiling is as an NFL quarterback.
I think he is, and I'm sure people will get all up in arms about this. I think there are a very limited number. In fact, there only might be one tier 1 quarterback in the NFL, and that's Patrick Mahomes. And you mentioned Alex Smith. Alex Smith lost his job to the eventual best quarterback in the league. Like, I mean, that in and of itself, if he's going to be Alex Smith, I'm fine with that, because until Alex Smith got hurt, he was a quarterback I thought could take you to the NFL or to the Super Bowl. And I think JJ eventually will develop into one of those top tier 2 guys where you're going to have weapons around him. In Patrick Mahomes, I think you could roll the ball out and you could put just about anybody on the field, and he's going to find a way to win just because of his throwing ability, his arm, his awareness in the game. But everybody else is going to need a run game. They're going to need receivers. They're going to need an offensive line, a good tight end. And if you put enough of those pieces around JJ, he's going to flourish, and he's going to be a guy that could take you, win divisions, win, and take you to the Super Bowl. Then it's ultimately up to the team to figure out what happens at that point. But he's a guy that can win a lot of games for you.
And then the last thing, you brought up Chop Robinson. He's on Washington's list as a guy like they certainly like. He was in for a top 30 visit. What do you like? What did you think of him as a defensive end?
Well, do you guys only have one first-round pick? I haven't done a deep dive.
One first-round pick and then 2 high second-round picks. So they have 6 in the top 100. So to get him, you may have to go back into the first round. But if he's sitting there with their first, second-round pick, I could see them taking a stab at him.
Well, I don't know that he's going to be there in the second round.
Either.
He doesn't make it past Detroit because, he's a guy, when I talk about changing a game plan, when you have to change a game plan because of one individual, that's a damn good football player. Yeah. His ability to get off the ball, he's as quick as they come with those first 2 steps off the ball. Now, he's a little bit undersized. I don't know how well he will hold up against the run. And there's different ways to scheme that and use these edge guys because we see it all the time. Guys that aren't great against the run, they still can be 3-down players. But for him, his star is going to be on the ability to get after the passer, and especially if you have somebody on the other side that you can pair with them. If you've got that 1-2 punch, which is everybody is looking for, he's a guy that if you're not focused on him and occasionally don't give him help, then he's going to get after the quarterback and he's going to make you pay for it.
I forgot. I had one more. Roman Wilson. People have told me they think he's going to be better in the NFL than he was in college.
Well, he's going to have more opportunity. Michigan wasn't an offense that was going to throw the ball a lot, just like we have questions about JJ. And I think Roman did a great job at the Senior Bowl of dispelling some of those myths. He's a little bit of a smaller guy, so he's kind of a slot receiver. He's a number 2 type of guy. But he's got very reliable hands, runs really good routes, runs hard out of his breaks, and is a guy that can go up and make some acrobatic catches.
John, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to go and vomit now. So I do appreciate. No, it was always, listen, I love talking to you and I miss talking to you in the locker room and all that. So it's good to see you. And thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me. And to all the Washington fans out there, I miss all of you. I know I'm here in Detroit, but there's still a special place in my heart for whenever I get a chance to come back to DC. I appreciate the warm welcome. I appreciate talking old school Redskin football. So I want to say hi to everybody over there as well.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to John for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back with another episode Monday. Talk to you next time.